I do theater because of collaboration and ensemble. It is like the reason that I'm like in this career and still in it decades later is because I really like get so much energy and joy from like a good collaboration.
Where people feel seen, where you feel free enough, safe enough to contribute and, really bring your special sauce into the soup.
Welcome, friends. I'm Kristen Marting, and this is Torches. Today we have multi-hyphenates Purva Bedi and Mariana Newhard. Both are acclaimed writer-performers who've worked in theater, film, and TV. I'm very excited to speak with them today. Welcome, Mariana and Purva.
Great to be here.
Thank you. We're so happy to be here.
Yay. So how did you both come to be in downtown performance?
I think the first thing I can think of was some shows with No Pants, the late Dominic Orlando's theater company. But I feel like what I think of downtown theater started at Here Arts Center when it was still Tiny Mythic. I went to an American Living Room show, and a friend of mine was in it, Nancy Bobberer, and then I got introduced to, I think, Rochelle Anthus. And I did an American Living Room piece about a wayward nun. And then I met you and Tim through that process and did Seven. So I think that was like my entree, that I can remember the earliest memory of it.
For me, I was a senior at Williams College. You actually came and spoke at Williams College on a panel. And so very early in my formative years, I was like, who is this Kristen Marting person? And then David Herskovitz from Target Margin Theater came and directed a version of King Lear at Williams College and cast me. And so then I stayed connected to David after graduation and started being like a spear carrier, painting the sets, whatever he needed, and started to get to know that company. And that was very much my entree into downtown theater. I started auditioning through Backstage, and I just found that for me, that was where there was space for me. That's where there was people were calling me and saying, come on in, we have something for you. And so Target Margin started me, and then it just expanded from there.
When you say that, it makes me think of, I feel like I had an aha moment about, we all, when you graduate, everyone's out of acting school and you're trying to get an agent, everyone's doing like showcases and you're kind of doing that kind of a hustle. And then when I feel like when I got introduced to Here, I think I had an aha moment. We were working on The Courtesan and we were rehearsing. We had these little solo pieces, tableau vivants, and Matthew Pierce, the composer, said, when are you doing Mariana's tableau vivant? Because I want to be there. And this it sounds kind of ego-driven, but it was sort of like this moment of like, oh, I'm part of this collaboration. I'm not just kind of a cog in the wheel. And this is different. There's like 5 writers on this show, and we're all trying to create a world. And I feel like that sort of lit this idea of this type of art making is different from what some of my other colleagues are doing just out of school.
One other thing that I just thought of, because we're mentioning Here, very early in my career, I also was connected to the Talking Band. Tina Shepard was also a professor of mine at Williams College, and we did a play called Bad Women at Here. You may remember that play, which was all like the bad women of Greek tragedies, all just coming together, and like all of the monologues and speeches from all of the plays we could get our hands on that had these like nasty Greek women. It was really fantastic.
You both have done so many downtown shows. How many do you think you've each done? Just off the top of your head, what do you think?
At least 50.
Yeah.
I think I've done like 40 something.
Yeah. And that's just like a produced show. Things that are almost shows or getting there, 100. I don't know.
And you both really were originally working as performers, but you both are also writers now. Do you feel like people resist that they try to categorize you and keep you as a performer, or now just make you be a writer? How do you deal with wearing both hats, and why is it interesting to you to wear both hats?
I feel like historically, when I was coming up, you weren't allowed to be a multi-hyphenate. People really needed to put you in a box, and that like 10, 20 years into my career, I was like, oh, actor writers are like a thing and it's common and not weird. And so I actually, for myself, it's not really answering your question, but had to give myself the permission to be like, oh, I contain multitudes, right? And so now I feel still like people think of me as a performer first. I think I still have a little bit of that residual, like generationally old framework for myself of being an actor more than a writer still, which I'm still working to break out of. So thank you for the reminder.
I think that this kind of theater, say downtown theater or more experimental theater, is the place, the first space that I felt like a very natural transition, because you're asked to collaborate so much. So often you're asked to, it's the devising space or the generating space. You're asked to, as a performer, create an improvisation or write something, or you're really collaborating in the room. So I feel like it was a space that made that transition for me more natural. Although I'd written before, not theatrical pieces, but I had that in my background. My realization is like, it's a normal thing. It's normal for people to wear different hats, to, be interested in multiple things, especially in the performing arts.
Yeah, I feel for downtown, it's almost like actually just saying like writer, actor actually reduces it, because I feel that when I'm in a room, it's not about just writing and acting, that it's like spirit, energy, like actual collaboration means you're actually firing on all cylinders. No, I'm not a designer, but I will inform the design just by being in the room and responding to the architecture, the energy of the space that we're in together, for example.
You've both done a ton of devising and a ton of new plays, as well as redos of classics, reworks, deconstructions of classics, and so forth. But how is the devising space? You were talking a little bit about how it's different in terms of what's being asked of you as a performer, but also on a new play, there's a lot being asked of you as a performer. Can you just share a little bit of your experience in those processes?
For me, I think bringing my personal history and experience into every room that I go into. Right now, we're developing a new play in a downtown theater, and I find that I keep talking about my family, my kids, and the play is very much about like families and community. And so in this particular case, where this play is being like shaped and formed, and it's sort of in its formative times, like my DNA is all over it. Like my kids are in there, like because it's informing the playwright. The playwright has said, it's challenging it's a play with 10 women, and to have each voice be super specific, that you need those actors in the room with their lived experiences to really understand how each of these 10 characters are quite different.
I can relate to that, and that when you come into a room to do new work as a performer, you get to be the OG with the who you are. You get to originate this character, as opposed to trying to find a different iteration. It's a different thing when you're the first person to like deal with the material and craft and develop it.
In this particular play, actually, like the character that really speaks to me is not even a character that I'm playing, but I'm weighing in so much on this character because she like really resonates with me. So, it's like an older actress who's playing her, but because the character has had children and the actor has not, but I have had children, I keep being like, no, this is totally true, because, and I keep throwing in all of this stuff, and it becomes this collaboration with this other actor and the playwright and me and the director, which is surprising. Like I didn't think going into the process it would be like that. And that is the beauty of this sort of downtown collaboration, is however the alchemy is in the room. It's not always what you expect.
Well, it's a risk too. What making new work is risky, and you don't know what it's going to be when you start the process as a performer or as a person that's creating the new work. What have you guys learned about risk inside this space?
Risk is an interesting thing to think about right now. So I think in my history, I've learned risk can lead you to different places. I mean, to write like a hybrid opera is not something I ever thought I would do. So risk can bring you to a freeing place. It can also bring you to, I started writing, this opera about sexual violence, and that turned into a piece about radicalization. I feel a calling now to continue to, have my voice be part of the record of history through art, but it is something I'm thinking about in terms of, as Trump's hand comes into like what artists are allowed to make and how much money we're allotted and the spread of those resources as they become more diminished. What does it mean for us to be risk-taking? Mm-hmm. I'm sort of answering your question with a question, but
yes.
But that it feels somewhat risky, or it's sort of like how I guess I am actively asking the question of how risky is it to be doing what I'm doing now?
Mm-hmm.
I always think, with risk, you can only really take risks if you feel safe. Mm-hmm. And if so, with resources, with, being able to pay your bills and make sure you have a home, I think that, it's really scary to take risks if you actually are scared for your life or your well-being. And certainly I've been in rehearsal rooms where it doesn't feel safe and I don't take risks and I pull right back. Mm-hmm. And I do as little as possible, whether it's in a rehearsal room, whether it's in the world with, certain administrations. I think figuring out how to get yourself to a place where you're safe and relaxed enough to take those risks is really important.
There's a quote from Mark Bamoudi Joseph, and what he recently said is, he said something about how do we give artists what they need in order to get to the other side of fear? And I'm curious if you have a reaction to that.
On the one hand, yes, I think that our artists offer the possibilities for how to live in the world and for how to be better, for how to be kind, for how to take care of each other. However, the artists themselves cannot do their work if they are feeling like they're not allowed to take risks, if they're unsafe, if they're afraid for their own lives, if they're afraid they're going to get picked up by a truck. So I think it's like, let's take care of our artists and then look to them to bring us to the other side.
It's true, though. I feel like art is the space that we can see. I feel like our superpowers allow for a different kind of vision and a different kind of sight alchemy, expression, especially, the kind of work we do, which is, the performing arts, which is the art form of humanity, of articulating the human condition. Mm-hmm. So what better medium to utilize to kind of examine and reflect what's happening now? It's a way to have dialogue and speak to each other. I mean, it's true. You're talking about safety. We were during the, it makes me think of the time that we were doing this online play with the Ukrainian company.
Yeah.
And a number of people were doing it, and we're in Zoom rooms with people in Kyiv, and there's bombing around them. They're huddled in this theater. You can probably speak a little more to exactly what was going on, but I felt in that moment, we're talking to them and we're trying to send them support and love, and they felt really great doing this piece of theater with us on Zoom. But then our reality, we're here in this safe space, and they were there in the midst of danger, and it felt not exactly wrong, but it was very hard to feel like, I felt it was very difficult to feel like I was contributing or we were contributing to their safety, even or their sense of purpose, their sense of something to hold on to within that. It felt really hard. So, yeah.
Yeah, this was the beginning of the Ukraine war, and they were wanting visibility. They were wanting more people to understand what they were going through. And they reached out to people outside Ukraine, and we put together a group of us to raise visibility on what they were going through. And so it was US and Ukrainians together in this Zoom space, but we were able to share it on HowlRound. I think we shared it. Like this series that we're doing right now, the Theater Commons for us all to gather on. So, I mean, I think that it was meaningful for them, but yeah, the reality that they were living in was a completely different reality than ours. I want to go back to something that you alluded to, and you were just talking about it a bit too. It was implied. As women and people of color, how does your identity inform the work that you're making and the way that you bring your aesthetic and shape your aesthetic in the space? Do you have thoughts about that?
I just naturally, as a writer, I naturally write about women mostly. So it's just what I'm interested in. It's great to have a medium that I can give voice to women and women of color. When I wrote Assembled Identity, I really wanted, we had 6 different languages. I really wanted Tagalog in there because I so rarely get to play Filipina. So, you can give yourself agency, and then you can amplify other voices, and the voices that I thought of this phrase when I was thinking about this question earlier. You can represent yourself, which is such a weird thing to say because I think it's difficult for women and women of color in the performing arts to be offered the opportunity to represent yourself. So it's a space where I can do that, and make sure I give voice and amplify those things that are concerning to me, whether it's sexual violence or climate change or racism and I think ambiguity or whatever it is that I'm invested in, that I'm not hearing anywhere else. This is a space where I can do that, represent.
Mm-hmm.
For me, there's been like a 30-year evolution that I've been in the downtown, uptown, midtown theater scene, right? I think that, right out of college, 21, 22, I really was trying to fit in, get a job, fit into people's projects, pray that I was part of their vision. I wasn't trying to represent myself, right? Because also I was in New York in, the mid-90s. There weren't a lot of brown actresses on the stages that I was seeing or on TV or on film. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm an actor and I don't know what's out here for me. So in the beginning, I wasn't trying to represent. I was just trying to exist. Right. I was just trying to work.
Yeah.
Right? And that as I've worked more and as I've matured, as I've lived life, I have much more embraced. No, I'm telling my story, a specific story. I was also an immigrant, right? I came to this country when I was 5 years old. So very early, there was always this need to fit in, adapt, figure out what the room is, what's my space in the room. And that is what the beginning of my career was kind of about. And that now it's oh, what do I bring to something? It's taken me 30 years to get here. And what's my story? And definitely what is the story of being a woman? What is the story of being an immigrant? What is the story of speaking different languages, of code switching?
I think it'd be great to just talk a little more about Assembled Identity, the project the 3 of us did together, because the way that piece started was the 2 of you. And the 3 of us were having a drink, and the 2 of you started talking about how you got called in for the same things, even though the things you were getting called in for weren't even your ethnicity. And that people were just ethnic ambiguity, they're kind of like that, so I'm going to call them in for that. That's where we started making the piece. Do you want to just talk more about what that impetus was about? And I feel like it's related.
Yeah, I think related to exactly what Purva was just talking about, how do we fit in? I mean, I literally remember this management company called Multi-Ethnic.
They're still around.
And one day,
God bless her.
God
bless her.
She literally showed me. She showed me the roster of auditions, and she basically was like, I can't send you out for anything that doesn't say multi-ethnic, because they didn't know what to do with me. What are you is the classic question, right? So yeah, this was an opportunity to kind of talk about that, and I don't think we were corroborating, but I don't think this is something anyone else had really talked about, and then that evolved into the idea of the clones having a parallel journey with having to prove their authenticity. So there's a kind of feeling that you get when people are like, well, what are you? You're not this enough, or you're not that enough. You're not, in my case, you're not white, really. You're not really Filipino. You're not really Latina. Like, we're not sure what or who you are. And we thought the clones were a great kind of metaphor for a kind of code switching, for a kind of space that you have to sort of prove your identity and explore, and then from there explore all these other themes that we did.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something, it was a science fiction piece where we chose to position it, and I think there's something about speculative fiction right now, like rereading Octavia Butler, and this time that we're looking for different solutions or different ways that we can see ourselves or redefine ourselves other than the systems and the frames that are out there. Yeah, I feel like we were thinking about that. Just as a follow-on to that, do you feel like there are expectations placed on you as women of color around what people want you to do or the way that they want to frame the work that you make?
It's funny, like, I just saw Liberation recently on Broadway, and, it's a very exciting play, and I loved many things about it. But I did sort of wonder, like, why aren't I in that play? Like, why isn't there something for me there? Like, I see a lot of white women. I see 2 Black women. And I was like, oh, because brown women didn't exist, I guess, in the 70s, apparently. Like there was a little bit of, and so I think that there are expectations, and it's confusing to me, right? It's like, oh, well, I can't be in certain kinds of period pieces, or there has to be a reason that there is an Indian woman or a woman of color here, and it drives me a little bit crazy. Like, like Meryl Streep gets to play every kind of white woman, and I can only play like someone from like a certain part of India. Like, I don't know, not that I'm Meryl Streep at all. I'm not saying that, but but yeah, it is a big question for me, what the expectations are. I mean, that's why one of the reasons I love like downtown theater so much is that there's a lot more opening around what those expectations are. I feel like, recently a filmmaker from Bollywood is like, what's like the most like sexy, racy thing you've done on camera? And I was like, nothing. Nothing, because I was always a sidey character. I have over 70 IMDb credits, but I've never been asked to really like be a super sexy character or take off my clothes or be romantic, even though my counterparts, like white actresses, are like, God, I'm asked to like show my tits in everything I do. I'm like, no one's asked to see my tits, and I have great tits.
You do, I've seen them.
But in the downtown theater scene, they want to see my tits sometimes, and I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
They're going to be cut out.
Definitely not.
Yeah, is it? I mean, that's interesting. It's just interesting to be like, okay, it's a weird set of issues that you have when you're then asked to be, do you want to be the object of desire in this very limited sexist portrayal of a, like it's slim pickings. It makes me think of when you were talking about the early days of acting and how you've evolved, Purva, into like, as you've matured, you're like, oh yeah, I don't really want to have to fit into that. I don't want to have to fit into this mold that says nothing about being a woman or a person of color or anything that is actually remotely interesting to me. But we're so eager as performers or as young actors to want to fit into something, and that expectation, it's tough, and it's deadly for creativity, and it feels really dishonest. So it's great to be able to open things up and have some agency, and there's always more of that possibility, or I've always felt historically there's more of that possibility in the experimental and the downtown world, where you're allowed to have your own voice, or you're allowed to see different people in those roles. Some of the first like period pieces I saw were, there were people of color, and it was not a big effing deal, was in the downtown theater.
Yeah, the nuance, the complexity, all of that came more from the downtown theater than the roles that I was being presented on TV and film, for sure.
Do you think that spirit that you're talking about of downtown theater still exists today? The experimentation and the risk taking, do you think it's still there?
I don't think I'm up on everything that's going on, but I think it's migrated to different places. I mean, I can think of like Jen Kidwell's show that I saw at the Flea recently about money.
We Come to Collect.
Thank you. I don't think I've seen anything like it, and it felt confrontational and really probing and interesting. And to me, that is an example of downtown, of not downtown theater exactly, but that spirit of experimentation, exploration that felt very risky, unpredictable, and was very thought-provoking. That I haven't seen anything like that, and I don't expect to on Broadway. But that was, one of the best things I've seen of late, and I felt like, I feel like that spirit cannot be quenched.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's all contracted. It's a lot less. It's a lot harder to make theater, in New York City specifically, I'm talking about. But I feel like the spirit of it is still very much alive, and it's just about finding containers and money, I guess, and ways to do it. But that's always been the issue with experimental theater.
For sure. How about collaboration? What has been an exciting and alive, and what made a collaboration really alive and exciting? What is essential to a good collaboration? Do you have thoughts about that with the experience of 40 to 50 shows each, just in this community, let alone all the other work that you've done in the other areas?
I love to be in rooms where everyone gets to be seen and heard, and their energies, like, they can really be themselves. And that implies safety, which we've talked about, right? Feeling really like safe and comfortable in a room. And there's something about just like this sort of ineffable spirit. And so really gathering the people in the room that are gonna bring a real diversity of experiences and energy. It's just magic when you're sort of like, it's like you feel so jazzed when you like walk into a good collaborative space, and everyone is sort of listening with not just their ears and heads, but like their whole bodies to each other, and that one's own work is getting like impacted and changed by the chemistry of the room. I mean, I do theater because of collaboration and ensemble. It is like the reason that I'm like in this career and still in it decades later is because I really like get so much energy and joy from like a good collaboration.
Yeah, I like that. Where people feel seen, where you feel free enough, safe enough to contribute and, really bring your special sauce into the soup. I also like collaboration where being seen or where how one person maybe does something that is outside the box, that is more less traditional, is their own kind of way of making something is allowed, that there isn't just this one way of doing things. Like I collaborated a lot with my friend Dina Emerson, who's this great, wonderful performer, composer, and she doesn't, score music, but it doesn't mean it's not serious, it doesn't mean we're not making something serious or something good. And she also loves to, one of the reasons she does that is like, she wants to work with who's in the room. So, she adjusts the music to where the singer is, like, where Purva's range is, and we adapt in the moment. And that's really collaborative approach to making art. And I think that kind of space where you can still have rigor and purpose, but there is still this kind of sense of play, or how you are approaching something that might have your own quirks is allowed, and you come up with something really special.
How have institutions supported or failed to support your work?
I'm a gigger, like I don't really I feel like an institution supports me while I'm doing a play for 2 months at that institution. There are some institutions that have hired me a few times and for those moments in time, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot of loyalty. Unfortunately, It is really, as an actor, maybe as a writer, I would feel differently, but I haven't had that like level of connection with an institution as a writer, only as an actor. And so it really, for the most part, of course I'm a board member at Target Margin Theater, so I'm like excluding them. I feel like that's a separate kind of relationship. But otherwise, I feel like for me, it's just like, where's my next, paycheck coming from? And then bye-bye. I get invited to some holiday parties too, I guess.
I would relate to what you're saying, Purva. But when I think about institutions, I'm also thinking about some of the smaller spaces. I'm thinking about the writers group we belong to, Women Artists Writing Group, and that as a space, for example, that was originally fiscally sponsored by the Dorset Theatre Festival in its beginning stages, and it afforded this group of women who were writers, but mostly performers who wanted to write, who were of a certain age. We were, most of us,
But can I interrupt? Just to say, I feel like that is a group that came together because of like-minded people coming together to create something that feels like an institution we just sort of made ourselves versus really like an outside institution providing us something. I feel like it was like, oh, let's get together and now let's find a theater to like take us on, which isn't the same thing as an institution just supporting you.
Right.
So not to take up an argument with your point.
No, you can. I think that's exactly right. I'm talking about smaller spaces and, that kind of, ingenuity of people seeking it out. It's true. It's harder for me to have an answer about feeling very supported. I don't know. I've received a state grant from NISCA, and that felt great. You do always feel like it's not enough. You feel terrific when you receive something, but it takes a lot, to get there.
And you've been awarded some residencies recently, like at the Edward Albee Foundation this summer, right?
Sure, yeah. That is a way that I, as a writer, have been supported. I have had residencies at the Albee Foundation, at NACL. I've had some really nice spaces that support me, and some places that keep coming back, that I've returned to and been able to develop as a obviously here Arts Center, where I started as a performer and was supported gradually, as I transitioned into being a writer and a lead generative artist. So those are important spaces that do that. I think it's been a little tougher as an actor, which is why I kind of transitioned into writing, because that's a space where I can have agency, and make my own work and move forward in that way. I think it's a tougher gig.
Well, I think that's exactly right. Like, if I'm looking at myself as an actor, I really am just like a gig worker, and I get support when I'm there, and I don't. But as a writer, I think you just have some other avenues to get a little bit more sustained support. But it may not be a lot of sustained support. But yeah, so I think it's a different conversation for acting versus writing, big time.
Yeah. If you could change one thing about the way institutions operate, and this could be theaters, this could be funding, this could be government, it could be anywhere in the ecosystem, what would that be?
Guaranteed income for actors.
Yeah.
We can prove we're working all the time. Nope, I work every day, whether or not I'm bringing in a paycheck,
It's a big question. It's a really big question. But I feel like we can't really ask that question without looking at our society and how it is structured, and what we think the role of, say, government should be, as a for me, it should be a service, rather than a business, and that we're integral to that. So I hope people. My wish is that minds can be open, that we can shift perspective to get to that regular salary.
I mean, there are years that I work nonstop off Broadway doing workshops, and I make nothing, but I'm working all the time. People think I'm working all the time, and I am. Like, I have like a different rehearsal for something like, every day. And and if you saw my paychecks, you'd be like, oh, how are you making this work? And that's ridiculous. Whether the government is subsidizing something, or whether there's maybe more money for the theaters that are paying me to then pay me more, but it's totally broken to be a working artist in this country.
Is there anything sustainable that you think of would change things to live more easily as beings and as artists, besides basic income, which would be great, and they're doing it in Ireland, so I don't know why we can't do it.
Well, it would be great if we could go see theater in New York and not have to pay so much money for it. As working actors, I can't really pay $200 to see a show.
The ability to have more community, by being able to see each other's work, not being siloed out of the different institutions, whether you're going to museum or the theater,
How do you define success as an artist, and has that definition evolved over time?
For me, it definitely has. Just actually being able to sustain being able to make art, to me, would be a level of success, which is hard to do. It's hard
because
to do
of the financial realities.
Even when I'm willing to do something else to support the art making, it's still hard to also make the art. But the idea of it to me is I've learned to separate art making and what is a job that I might get through my art. And that to me it's not a measure of success to get this role, or to be allotted money for this play, but just to be able to create my own work. That to me is the measure of success. Being able to design it.
I think for me it's a few things. I think the ability to inspire, to get inspired, and to be able to connect with my artistic community regularly, right? Because in terms of money, the jobs that like pay you are like never very inspiring. The ones that pay you really well, right? Usually they're not very inspiring or any, but if you can like go into like a really good workshop of a new play, and it's okay that you're only going to make, $400 that week. But you get to feel like juicy and inspired and great, and you have a life that allows you to do that workshop, because maybe next week you're going to do that like one day on a TV show and make like, real money for that day. That if you can sort of balance all of those things and stay connected in your heart to what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think that is success. And, I have a friend, and she inspires me. She's an actor, and she says no to like things that I would say yes to. Because she's like, I don't need to do this in the world. I don't need to put this out there. I'm like, yeah, you don't need to put that out there. Mm-hmm. So I'm working to get to that point, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah. I think I'd add, inspired by some of what you were saying, Purva, creating spaces where I'm affecting dialogue and connecting with community, and where we're symbiotically like creating more and more art, like contributing to the world in that way, and amplifying the right voices and spaces and voices that aren't normally heard, just having, amplifying that freedom.
Yeah, I think like, there's a creation and destruction, and there's a plenty of frickin' destruction in this world. So to me, success would be staying in a space of creativity, of making with others.
That was going to be my next question, was what keeps you creating? How do you keep the spirit and the passion and the reason to keep going? But I think you both just gave that.
And it's other people, really. It's like-minded people who want to try something, who want to experiment, who want to present another possibility to the world of what we can be like in the world.
It's definitely other people and other art, but it's also for me, I'm speaking more in terms of like as a writer, it's getting the space to discover that voice. It is kind of being in that, being allowed, a room of one's own. Shout out to Virginia Woolf. But it really is true. I feel like I need that space, the space and time to make work. And it's kind of it's very precious without trying to make that sound precious. But it's closer, for me, it's closer to something a little more divine, the art, the act of practicing creating art is, almost a spiritual practice for me. So that is what is, for me, what is inspiring, going back to that space, and I feel like if I feel lost about what to make, returning to that and having the faith within that space is what starts, what gives me that energy and hope to like keep creating.
Could you each share a favorite moment or a moment of pure joy in a work that you've made?
Cheese.
Cheese.
Cheese. Just that time we had cheese.
Anytime we had cheese.
When we were cooking our own food at Anisayao. Right.
Gosh, there's so many. I think I could say, I don't know. I could say that it's the ephemeral families that we create. There's nothing like, especially in the theater, there's nothing like that thing that is like you're this tight family, and sometimes it can be super intense, and it's really, I don't know, there's something so great about it. And there's a reason we have like postpartum after we like break up from a show, and it's just there's really nothing like it. It's communal. It's thrilling, exciting. You're that thing. I guess, and there are many moments like that that are very, have their own nuances, but I think it's that thing, that special thing is the joy, one of the joys I can think of.
It's true. It's like when you have a relationship with like one partner and you break up and it's like heartbreak. Every time we do a show, every time like the 10 of us or the 15 of us or the 6 of us or the 3 of us like come together, create something together that would never have been created without exactly those people in the room. Mm-hmm. And then it ends, but you are like bonded for life. Like I don't think I've hung out the 3 of us, just the 3 of us, like maybe since we did our show. Mm-hmm. Right? But I just feel this like deep connection forever from that time. And I'm talking about, we did that like 6 years ago, right?
Right. A little longer ago. I think we started it like 2016 and finished it in 2018?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
2015, I think we started. We
2015.
did long germination process.
So that was a long time ago. That always lives. Yeah. It's always alive for us when we're together, even though like, we haven't been in that dynamic for a minute. Yeah.
There's one thing that sticks out. It was like it's a writing moment. And it was when we were with the Women Artist Writing Group, and we were in Vermont, and it was this weekend that we were reading all of our plays. We were reading 13 plays in like a weekend. And I was like writing. I was like up to the minute. It was 20 minutes before we were going to read my play, and I was writing. And I was like, it's this play about feminism and like climate Armageddon, which I didn't know it was really about that. But anyway, and I'm thinking there's this moment where there's this escalation, and I was like, and I think there's a giant squid that comes through the door, and I'm like, no, you can't put a squid. You can't do that. That's too much. That's crazy. And I was like, fuck it. I'm gonna put the squid in. Let's see what happens. And we're reading, and then when that moment came, I looked over, and Maggie and Carolyn, these other women in the room, they went, whoa, and I went like, ah. It was just like, yeah, the squid is in, and I think that's just to me like what I'm trying to tell the kid who is like thinking, should I get into like, put your squid in the room, just do it, and it will bring you much joy.
I'll share a bliss moment. It's so silly. My bliss moment would be we did an all Asian Cymbeline over at Classic Stage. Natco did it. And then for some reason, it was like for the dumbest reason ever. We had a matinee. We came back from our matinee knowing we had an evening show that was going to be, we were at our half hour, and we got an announcement that the show was canceled because at the last minute our wardrobe person quit, and as happens with off-Broadway shows, there's only one wardrobe person, and so if they quit, you're kind of screwed. So we like had to cancel our show at half hour, and we're all in the theater, and they decided we're still going to keep you all. There's no audience. We're sending everyone home, but we're going to do the show and train this new wardrobe person. So we're still going to do a show, but no one's going to see it.
Oh my God.
And it was totally ridiculous because it's like a Saturday night. People had their family in who had flown in to see the show, who weren't going to see the show. It was like the worst of times, but also the best of times because we just lost it. And so what we all started to do backstage is one of the characters wore a ridiculous jacket that was like this big, and we all just started trying it on and doing a photo shoot in the dressing room on our downtime and just like going crazy and having a party and having drinks and just, because we were training this person and it was very relaxed and casual and like not a real show. So we just like made a party of this like horrible thing where we had to cancel a show for a dumb reason. Which is what you do with family.
Yes. Thank you both so much for doing this. This has been an amazing conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to you for tuning in. And to Howl Round for hosting us. And we hope you'll come back and see more of Torches. Thank you.